Box FM with fear.
Welcome to Horror Box FM, tonight's late night frequency for the unexplained. Grab a seat, turn down the lights, and settle in. You are listening to episode 13, and tonight, we have a bone-chilling story sent to us by a listener named Andrew. This isn't your typical ghost story. It's a grounded, terrifyingly realistic account of an isolated house, a relentless winter, and the horrifying realization that someone, or something, was living just inches above his head. Get comfortable. This is * footsteps on the roof at 3 a.m. It happened 3 years ago, during the coldest winter I have ever experienced. I had just taken a remote contract job as a data analyst, which meant I could work from anywhere. Wanting to escape the noise of the city, I rented a small, one-story cabin in a heavily wooded area just outside a small town in upstate New York. The cabin was beautiful but isolated, surrounded by dense pine trees that seemed to swallow up all sound. It had a pitched, corrugated metal roof, a detail that becomes very important later. For the first 2 weeks, it was absolute paradise. The silence was deafening in the best way possible. I would wake up, make coffee, stare out at the snow-covered trees, and work until nightfall. Because the nearest neighbor was over 2 miles away, I felt completely secure. I didn't even bother locking the front door during the day. Then, the snowstorms hit. Heavy, thick blizzard conditions trapped me inside for days. The snow piled up, burying the base of the cabin and weighing down the branches of the pines. That was the night it all started. It was exactly 3:14 a.m. I know the time because the blue light of my digital alarm clock was the only thing illuminating my bedroom. I am a light sleeper, and a sudden, distinct sound woke me up instantly. Thud. It was followed by a heavy, dragging scrape. I sat up in bed, my heart hammering against my ribs. I held my breath, listening intently. At first, I tried to rationalize it. The wind was howling outside, so I figured a heavy pine branch laden with snow had broken off and fallen onto the metal roof. It made sense. I forced myself to relax, lay back down, and closed my eyes. But then, the sound changed. Crunch. 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 It wasn't a branch. It was the rhythmic, deliberate sound of footsteps. Heavy boots compressing the thick layer of snow on top of my house. I froze, completely paralyzed by fear. The footsteps were moving slowly, shifting from the far corner of the living room roof toward the center, directly above where my bedroom was. The metal roof groaned under the weight. Each step was slow, calculated, and heavy, definitely a grown adult. I stared at the ceiling, my eyes straining in the dark. The footsteps stopped right above my bed. For 10 agonizing minutes, there was absolute silence. No movement. Just the sound of the wind outside. I didn't dare move a muscle. I didn't even want to breathe loudly. Whoever was up there was standing completely still, right above me. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the footsteps moved away, walking toward the back edge of the roof. I heard a soft thwack sound, like someone jumping down into the deep snow at the back of the cabin. I lay awake until sunrise, gripping a baseball bat, terrified to look out the windows. When the sun finally came up, I gathered enough courage to put on my winter gear and step outside. I walked around to the back of the cabin where I thought the person had jumped down. Sure enough, there was a massive disruption in the deep snowbank. But what made my stomach drop were the tracks leading to the cabin. There were footprints coming out from the deep, dark woods, leading straight to the side of the house. Near the water tank, the person had climbed up onto the low-hanging roof. But here is the detail that made my blood run cold. The footprints coming out of the woods were deep, defined boot prints. But the tracks leading away from the house back into the woods, they weren't boot prints anymore. They were the barefoot, splayed prints of human feet. Someone had taken their boots off on my roof, or thrown them away, and walked back into the freezing, sub-zero wilderness completely barefoot. I immediately called the local sheriff. Because of the snowstorm, it took them over 3 hours to reach my cabin. 2 deputies arrived, took my statement, and went out to inspect the tracks. I watched them from the window as they followed the barefoot prints into the woods. About 45 minutes later, they returned. Their faces were grim. One of the deputies, an older man named Miller, told me that the tracks went about half a mile into the dense forest before abruptly stopping near a frozen creek. There were no signs of a body, no signs of clothes, just nothing. The tracks just vanished. Deputy Miller advised me to lock my doors, keep my outdoor lights on, and call them immediately if I heard anything else. They assumed it was a transient or someone suffering from a severe mental episode or hypothermia-induced paradox undoing, where freezing people mistakenly feel hot and strip off their clothes. That explanation brought me some comfort, but it didn't cure the deep anxiety that had settled into my bones. The next 2 nights were quiet. I kept every single light in the cabin turned on. I barely slept, relying on coffee and caffeine pills to stay awake. By the 4th night, exhaustion finally took over. I crashed onto my bed around 11 p.m., falling into a deep, dreamless sleep. I woke up with a jolt. The house was pitch black. Power outage. The storm had knocked out the electricity, taking my security lights and my heat with it. The air inside the cabin was already turning icy. I reached for my phone on the nightstand to use the flashlight. The battery was dead. As I sat there in the freezing darkness, trying to find my bearings, the sound returned. Thud. It was much louder this time, as if someone had leaped onto the roof from a nearby tree branch. My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. The footsteps began instantly, but they weren't slow and calculated like before. They were fast. Asterisk crunch 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 crunch. Someone was running across the roof. They ran from the front of the cabin to the back, then turned around and ran back. It sounded frantic, manic, completely wild. The metal roof was vibrating, making a terrible, echoing booming sound inside the empty cabin. Then, the running stopped. Right above my bedroom. I heard a strange, wet, scraping sound. It sounded like someone was dragging something heavy and fleshy across the metal panels. I realized with absolute horror what it was. Someone was crawling on their hands and knees directly above me. Suddenly, a loud, sharp scratching sound echoed through the room. It was right at the top of my bedroom wall, where the roof met the exterior siding. Asterisk scratch. Scratch. Scratch, asterisk. It sounded like fingernails clawing desperately at the wood, trying to find a way inside. I couldn't stay in that bed anymore. I grabbed my baseball bat from under the bed, slipped out into the hallway, and crept toward the living room. The living room had a small wood-burning stove, and the faint orange embers inside gave just enough light to see shadows. As I stood in the middle of the living room, the scratching stopped. Then, I heard a sound that made me drop my bat. It wasn't coming from the roof anymore. It was coming from the chimney. A low, wet, ragged breathing sound was echoing down the flue of the wood-burning stove. Asterisk ha. 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 It sounded heavy, distorted, and inhumanly cold. "Who's there?" I screamed, my voice cracking with pure terror. "I have a gun. Get the hell away from my house." The breathing stopped instantly. For 3 minutes, the silence was suffocating. Then, from the roof directly above the living room ceiling, I heard a voice. It wasn't a loud shout. It was a raspy, dry whisper, yet it was perfectly audible through the thin ceiling panels. It spoke only 3 words, repeating my own voice back to me in a distorted, mocking tone. "Who's there?" I lost it. I didn't care about the blizzard, the freezing cold, or the dark woods. I grabbed my car keys from the counter, ran to the front door, unlocked it, and burst out into the freezing night. As I sprinted through the deep snow toward my truck, I made the mistake of looking back at the cabin. In the pale moonlight reflecting off the snow, I saw a figure crouching on the peak of the roof. It was completely naked. Its skin looked sickeningly pale, almost grayish-white, and its limbs looked unnaturally long and thin. It was perched on all fours like an animal, its head tilted at a bizarre, broken angle, staring directly down at me. It didn't have hair, and in the dim light, its eyes looked like 2 hollow, pitch-black pits. I scrambled into my truck, jammed the key into the ignition, and slammed on the gas. The tires spun wildly in the snow for a second before catching traction. I sped down the unplowed driveway, never looking back. I drove straight to the sheriff's station and stayed there until morning. The next day, I returned to the cabin with 3 armed deputies to pack up my belongings. I refused to spend another minute in that place. When we arrived, the figure was gone. But the evidence of what had happened was undeniable. Up on the roof, around the chimney and the edges of the bedroom ceiling, the snow had been completely cleared away. Not by the wind, but by hands. There were deep scratch marks gouged directly into the metal roofing and the wooden trim, as if something had tried to tear the house apart with its bare fingers. And all around the chimney, there were smears of dark, frozen blood. The deputies searched the surrounding woods again, but the heavy snowfall from the night had completely covered any new tracks. They found nothing. I broke my lease that very day, forfeited my deposit, and moved back to the city. I took a massive financial hit, but I didn't care. It has been 3 years since that night. I live in a high-rise apartment complex now, surrounded by hundreds of neighbors and the constant ambient noise of the city. But every winter, when the temperature drops and the wind starts to howl outside my window, I find myself staring up at the ceiling. And sometimes, in the dead of winter, right around 3 a.m., I swear I can still hear the faint, slow crunch of footsteps walking directly over my head.
Box FM with fear.